Good morning. How are you this morning? It's Saturday night here in Chesapeake, Virginia. I realize when you're watching this, it'll be Sunday morning. Actually, as I'm recording this, it's Sunday morning. My first 3 takes didn't work right, something I didn't do right, so hopefully the 4th time is a charm, and maybe I needed the practice on this message. So if you'll take your Bibles and turn to Numbers chapter 16, that's the passage where we will primarily be this morning. Numbers 16. The series that we're working on is from Jude 11, where we find 3 men who are united in infamy. Jude verse 11 reads, "Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Korah." Last week we preached on Cain and saw what his problems were. He was covetous. He craved God's approval, yet without the willingness to change to meet God's standards. He conformed outwardly without being transformed inwardly. And lastly, he was corrected, but was unrepentant and unwilling to acknowledge his wrongdoing. The part we're going to look at today is the last phrase, the gainsaying of Korah, and then next week we will talk about the error of Balaam. Let's look first about that word gainsaying. Well, in Old English, the word gain meant against. Middle English, gain became gain. Sometimes for humorous effect, a speaker might still say, I'm again something, which we understand means that they oppose it. When you put this together with the Middle English word saying, you get the idea of again saying means to speak against. Middle English word carried over to early modern English as gainsay. To gainsay means to contradict, to oppose, to dispute, to deny, contest, or challenge. The gainsaying of Korah. Korah, we know, is the name Korah from the Hebrew. If you're looking for a condensed version of the message, it would simply be this. Number 16 tells the story of a disgraced man who asserted himself and aspired for a leadership position in worship. And his attitude of rebellion instantly disqualified him and led to his untimely death. The message would be, beware of the spirit of contradicting spiritual leadership. Well, as we begin to look at Korah, we see that only 5 books of the Bible mention his name. We already saw that Jude 11 contains a reference. I've asked you to open to number 16, which is where we find the primary account of his life. The third place I'd have you look, or that we'll discuss briefly, is in the book of Exodus. We begin to get some of his lineage and some of his story of who he is. Now, the other 2 I will save until the end of the message. Exodus 6:21 tells us that he is the son of Izhar, the grandson of Kohath, and the great-grandson of Levi. He was born during the Egyptian captivity, and due to some prophecies that we have in Genesis, we understand that the timeline is ticking, the clock is ticking toward the end of Israel's time in the land of Egypt. The Israelites were aware of the prophecy that God gave to Abram in Genesis 15. Verse 13. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. We see very clearly the number 400 used here. However, when we go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 40 says this, Now the sojourning of the children of Israel, who dwelt in Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. How can both of these be correct? Some may say, well, God was just rounding off in the book of Genesis to a nice, even 400 years. However, we find that God doesn't do that. In His Word, He takes the time to give us specific dates and ages of when one man has a child. and how old that son was whenever he had his child, and the ages of individuals when they died. God is very specific and precise in the book of Genesis, in Numbers, in the Chronicles. There are many names, ages. All these things are very accurate to show God's accuracy. So what do we have in Genesis and Exodus? Do we have a discrepancy? Do we have a contradiction? Anytime you're tempted to ask yourself, is there a contradiction in God's Word? Rather than automatically assuming, yes, there must be a contradiction, so I don't have any use for God's Word, I'm going to put it aside and realize it's a book filled with errors and no longer rely on it. Or you can have the proper attitude. That attitude would be, Lord, please help my finite, limited mind to understand how to harmonize these Scriptures. God, I know you're a God of no mistakes. So any mistake in this lies in my understanding. So I want to take a couple minutes and harmonize these two passages just so that you can see a point that we're trying to get to. God tells Abram this, that his people will be afflicted for 400 years. He says this when Abraham is only 75, realizing that there are 25 more years to pass until Isaac is born. And then on Isaac's 5th birthday is whenever a party is thrown by Abraham and Sarah for Isaac to celebrate his weaning. And at that point, Ishmael mocks him. Sarah says he's got to go. God confirms to Abraham at that time, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. You can dismiss Hagar. You can dismiss Ishmael. Isaac is the chosen one. If you do the math on that, God gives Abraham a prophecy when he's 75. 25 years pass, Isaac is born. Add another 5 years to that, and on Isaac's 5th birthday, he is afflicted by the son of an Egyptian woman. 400 years from that point, the Israelites would be afflicted by the Egyptian people. And 430 years from the date of the prophecy of the beginning of the sojourning, notice it didn't say of the captivity, it says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. See, so what we have to understand is they weren't in Israel for a period of 400 or even for 430 years. They were in for much less, actually. And what happened there, and the way that we reconcile those two accounts, is that from the point that Isaac was first afflicted by the son of an Egyptian to the point that Israel left Egypt was 400 years. And God gave Abraham the prophecy of the 400 years, 30 years before the affliction began to take place. Well, the timeline began to count down. We understand the clock is ticking here. And as Joseph dies, 64 years later, Moses is born into a situation where a king is in power that knew not Joseph. And because of that, the Israelites are being afflicted because this man quite possibly understands that Israel is being on the verge of a rebellion. And that they are on the verge of leaving the land of Egypt. And frankly, they've been a pretty good workforce. Really, Egypt can't stand to do without them. So their viewpoint is, if we can eliminate the leader of the rebellion, and we can eliminate him when he is a baby, then we can effectively quell the rebellion. So, 80 years before Israel is scheduled to be released is when Moses is born, you understand. And in that time, they had already been active in killing, or we can use the term that cleans it up, infanticide, killing babies in the Nile River. Well, that process and that scheme did not work for Pharaoh. That scheme did not work for Herod the Great either, who was asked, Where is he that is born king of the Jews? And Herod begins to realize there could be a rival to my throne. And he's just been born. I have a decree. Let's kill all the male children that are 2 years old and downward. Herod the Great's plan didn't work. Pharaoh's plan didn't work. What I do want to point out is every anti-God society has been obsessed with the widespread murder of babies. Our generation is no better than Egypt's Middle Kingdom, no better than a Roman Empire controlled Israel. It's a very sad time in history. As I said, the year of Moses' 80th birthday marked the end of the 430 years from when God first spoke to Abram and gave him the prophecy in Genesis 15. Moses' 80th birthday marked 400 years from the point when Ishmael first afflicted Isaac. We go back to the period of Egyptian infanticide. We aren't told how long that the handmaids were told to do this. We don't know how much they actually obeyed that. They gave excuses. They feared the Lord, as Exodus 1 tells us. So we're not sure how many male Hebrew babies died during that time. But there is a strong possibility that one of those sons that was spared was Korah. And if Pharaoh was aware of that 400-year time frame of Israel being released from captivity, then certainly Korah's parents, Ezra and his wife, must have been as well. And as parents, we all have dreams for our children, and those parents were very likely dreamers as well. What if our son is the deliverer of Israel? What if our son is the one who leads Israel out of captivity? What if he's the chosen one? But Korah wasn't the chosen one. Moses was the chosen one. This Moses, a fugitive from justice, a runaway from his problems. Some might go so far as to call him a coward for being gone for the last 40 years. Beside all this, Moses, who wasn't quite born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but 3 months into his life, he very promptly got that silver spoon. Here's a man who hasn't known a day of slave labor, a guy who associates more with Egyptian royalty than he does with these slaves with whom he's supposed to sympathize and empathize. He's the deliverer. Well, Korah was no stranger to Moses. However, he was his first cousin, as his father and Moses' father were brothers. They were both of those men were sons of Kohath. Both of them were from the tribe of Levi, and both would have significant roles in the religious and governmental areas of Israel. But that kinship between Moses and Korah didn't make things better. Korah having a position within the hierarchy of the Kohathites didn't make things any better either. See, the issue is Korah wanted the position of priest that belonged solely to Aaron's family. How were his cousins any more worthy of that position than he was? Why did God arbitrarily choose Moses and Aaron to lead the people when there's a perfectly good Korah that could have done the job? I want you to, for a minute, put yourself in the shoes of Korah, and we're going to look at 11 events in Israel's history to give you a little insight into how Korah is thinking about things. Number one, from the time Moses pops on the scene in Exodus chapter 5, Pharaoh has made their lives harder because Moses has asked for them to be released so they can go and worship. Now they're having to keep making as much brick as they were, and they're having to go gather the straw to do so. It's heavy labor, it's become more intense, and the punishments have become greater. Not a good start. Number two, Moses, as the leader, has put the children of Israel into a next to impossible situation by the side of the Red Sea. And Moses couldn't really do anything about it. He just said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And God came by and miraculously rescued us. Number 3, as soon as they were through the Red Sea, in Exodus chapter 15, Moses led them to a place of bitter water. Again, God had to intervene there. Exodus 16, they were hungry, no food. What kind of man takes 1 million people into a land where there's nothing to eat? Miraculously, fortunately, God provides manna for them to eat. Number 5, the children of Israel are thirsty again in Exodus chapter 17. Exodus 32, Moses takes the people to Mount Sinai. He deserts them and ascends the mountain while they're down, not knowing what happened to Moses. Is he dead? Is he alive? Nobody knows. Let's make a golden calf. Let's make a couple of them. That may be what we need. We can't really be at fault for this. Moses is at fault because he deserted us. And while he went up, the people sinned. When he came down, many people were destroyed because of the sin. Not a good look, Moses. 7, Numbers chapter 11. People are sick of manna. They ask for meat. Moses, are you going to come through and get us some meat? Moses doesn't know where to get any meat. God sends some meat. He sends quail into the camp. With the quail, he sends judgment because the children of Israel were unthankful. But let's blame Moses. Number 8, Miriam and Aaron, Moses' brother and sister, complain about Moses' leadership in chapter 12 of Numbers. Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? Now even his brother and sister have lost confidence in him. Way to go, Mo. Number 9, in Numbers chapter 13, we find that this Moses, who is supposed to take us into the promised land, has this harebrained scheme of sending 12 spies in. 10 of those spies come back with an evil report. 2 come back with a positive report. Who are we supposed to believe? 10 is greater than 2. Who are we supposed to believe? We're going to believe the 10. What kind of leader would do that? Now we're not going to the promised land. Then we get to number 10. We are going to go into the promised land. Don't care what Moses says. Don't care what God said. We're going in. Round up a leader who will take us into battle. They went into battle. Moses refused to go. The Ark of the Covenant was not taken, and those people lost their lives. They were instantly defeated. Moses, you're not batting a very good percentage. Number 11 in Numbers chapter 14. Verse 4, they've lost all confidence and they say, let us make a captain and let us return into Egypt. The Israelites were ready for new leadership. Moses had let them down yet again. This brings us right to the doorstep of Numbers 16. So we'll begin to look at these and let's see what we have here. Verse 1, now Korah the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. They rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. So you understand, there's 250 men or more involved in this. This was not some pop-up mob. There had been considerable time, considerable planning put into this revolt. Verse 3, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, saying, and said unto them, you take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them. And the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. I dare say that the congregation was not all holy, as Korah tried to say. Those 11 issues that we looked at previously, most of them involved some complaining by the Israelites. They involved sin by the Israelites. And God said in Numbers 14, these 10 times have you provoked me. Moses, on all those occasions, stood up for them. 3 of those times already, God was ready to wipe them completely off the map and start over with Moses until Moses interceded for them. Well, even if Korah just meant his 250 princes were holy, they have another thing coming because they're not deserving of leadership because of their treachery. Verse 4, when Moses heard it, he fell upon his face, and he spake unto Korah and unto all his company, saying, even tomorrow the Lord will show who are his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near unto him, even him who he hath chosen will he cause to come near unto him. This do, take you censers, Korah, and all his company, and put fire therein, put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord doth choose, he shall be holy. Ye take too much upon you, ye sons of Levi. He throws that same charge right back at them. And Moses said unto Korah, hear I pray you, ye sons of Levi. Seemeth it but a small thing unto you that the God of Israel hath separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation, to minister unto them? And he hath brought thee near to him, and all the brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee. And seek ye the priesthood also? For which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord? And what is Aaron that you murmur against him? See, the root of this is that Korah wants to be the priest. He's not happy with simply performing the role of a Kohathite. And I will tell you specifically what those roles were a little later. See, he has mud on Aaron too. He thinks back and remembers when Moses was on Mount Sinai, Aaron says, break off your earrings. I'll make us a god. I'll make us a pair of golden calves. We'll follow them back into Egypt. He remembers that Aaron, along with Miriam, rebelled against Moses because he had married an Ethiopian wife and said, God doesn't just speak through you. He speaks through us too. Who are you? Verse 16, let's skip ahead. And Moses said unto Korah, be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they and Aaron, tomorrow, and take every man his censer and put incense in them. And bring ye before the Lord every man his censer, 250 censers, thou also and Aaron, each of you his censer. They took every man his censer and put fire in them and laid incense thereon, and stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. They fell upon their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with all the congregation? See, here's Moses pleading for a fourth time with God against the destruction of Israel. No one could say that Moses didn't love his people. The Lord said unto Moses, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the congregation, saying, get you up from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Go down to verse 27. So they got up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out, stood in the door of their tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moses said, hereby shall you know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of mine own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth and swallow them up, with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, quick there means alive, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. If they die of natural causes, then it's not judgment of God. But if they die in a very unusual way, you will know that God caused this. And it came to pass, as he made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses and all the men that appertained unto Korah and all their goods. They and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. And there came out a fire from the Lord and consumed the 250 men that offered incense. There's been some debate among the Jewish community of what type of death Korah died, because his name is not mentioned specifically in these categories. We see that his two co-conspirators went down into the pit. We saw that those who were holding a censer were burned up by fire. Did he die with Dathan and Abiram as the earth opened up? Did he die from the fire of God that consumed the censers? Or if those events happened simultaneously, some of the scholars actually believe that God sent two forms of punishment on Korah for his rebellion. They were both burned and fell alive into the pit. We're not sure, but we are certain of one thing. God judged his rebellion harshly and quickly. Skip down to verse 41. But on the morrow, all the congregation of the children of Israel were very repentant and loyal to Moses, and confessed their sin and got everything right, and said, we will never follow a person like Korah again. I wish that was what it said. That would be the smart thing to do. If you see that God has just wiped out those who stood against Moses, I think I would be standing firmly on the side of Moses. But instead, the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, ye have killed the people of the Lord. And it came to pass when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared, and Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, get you up from among this congregation, that I may consume them as in a moment. And they fell upon their faces. And Moses said unto Aaron, take a censer, and put fire therein from off the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly unto the congregation, and make an atonement for them. For there is wrath gone out from the Lord. The plague is begun. This is the fifth time that Moses spares the Israelites from mass destruction. And Aaron took as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people. And he put on incense, and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and living, and the plague was stayed. Now they that died in the plague were 14,700, beside them that died about the matter of Korah. Nearly 15,000 people, when you sum it all up, died because of the rebellion of one man. Now, what was the root of Korah's sin? First of all, much like Cain, he was covetous. Cain wanted the acceptance of God, while Korah wanted a position of leadership. He did have a special place of servants as a Kohathite, which I will mention specifically what those roles were a little later. Not only was he covetous, number two, he was critical. I'll grant you this. Korah's leadership, Moses and Aaron, were not perfect. And if you were waiting for a perfect leader, you're going to have to wait until Revelation 19, when the Lord Jesus Christ touches down on this earth again. Let me tell you something. Your search for an imperfect pastor ends here. I'm going to say that again in case you didn't catch exactly what I said. Your search for an imperfect pastor ends here. You have found him. Now, some people like an imperfect pastor, and they like that concept because they like to think that even though they sin, that because the preacher also sins, that what the preacher has to say about their sin is invalid. Well, let me tell you this. What makes my declaration of your sin valid is because what I say mimics what God's Word says. See, I can tell you the proper way to live, not because I have everything figured out and that I am 100% obedient, but because I found it in God's perfect Word. I certainly have a duty to strive to live perfectly, to live a life without reproach. Listen, if I display imperfection, pray for me. If I offend you, please confront me, as Matthew 18 commands us to do. But to criticize places you in Korah's camp. Criticism is when a negative heart meets an unbridled tongue. Proverbs 14:1 says, "Every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her hands." I would go so far to say that a foolish woman or a foolish man may also tear down that house with their hands, but they do it also with their words. See, it takes talent, planning, and skill to build a structure. But any old fool can vandalize, commit arson, or destroy. Here in the States, home improvement shows are quite the rage. Several networks you can watch 24/7 programming on making your home better and doing some sort of renovation. Usually they start with some house that's just really hideous, or a layout that is just not ideal. Or maybe it's just that the home hasn't been updated since 1960. And the desire is to take and make something great out of that place. Usually before any improvement could take place, the first thing that has to happen is some destruction, some demolition. And in the rare event that I do watch these shows, something inside me gets excited when I see them pull out the sledgehammer or the Sawzall. I see those things and I see them begin to knock out walls and to clear studs out of the way, maybe even smash some windows, do away with an old countertop. And I think to myself, all right, that'd be so cool to do that. Excuse me. But when it gets to the part where they begin to sit down and do a project that takes several hours or days or weeks, and you know that the person who's performing that task has spent months and years perfecting their trade. Well, I don't have as much desire to do that. It doesn't interest me as much. You want to know why? Because any fool can tear down, but it takes talent to create something. Criticism is only for the purpose of destruction. But Brother McCain, what do you say about constructive criticism? You understand full well that nothing Korah had to say was meant to be constructive. We're talking about the destructive type of criticism and a critical spirit that marked his life. Not only was he covetous and critical, but thirdly, his sin was contagious. Oh, how I wish godliness were contagious. Positive peer pressure is a thing that exists, but it's usually on a very small scale and in a limited time frame. It just doesn't seem to keep the momentum that negativity does. I mean, just think back to Numbers 13 as we talked about earlier. There were 2 spies that said, "We be well able to go and conquer the land. Let's go up and take it immediately." And 10 of them said, "We be not able to go up." The congregation hears both reports, and they go with the negative peer pressure. They decide, you're absolutely right. The criticism was contagious. The unbelief was contagious. The complaining among Israel was contagious. But see, the problem wasn't with Moses' leadership, as Korah liked to paint the picture. The problem was with Israel's unbelief. The problem was in the heart of the ones doing the complaining, doing the criticizing, having the unbelief. Every situation that God put Israel into was an opportunity to show His power. But Korah couldn't see it that way. Can you? When you are placed in a situation that is less than ideal, when you are placed in a situation where you can't figure out which direction is up, and you can't see a way out, and you begin to say, "Why me, God?" When it rains, it pours. And you begin to be downtrodden and downcast. Instead, you should say, "God, I can't wait to see how you're going to come through for me in this circumstance. God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'm trusting you to display your power yet again in my life." Do you gather commiserators in your pessimism? Or do you gather compatriots in your prayer life? Now, one thing we can say about Korah, if there is a positive thing to say, is that he was indeed a leader. Now, some leaders are born, other leaders are made out of necessity. I will say this: if God has given you the gift of leadership, or if He has allowed you to develop the gift of leadership, you'd better be dead sure to use it for good. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you compass sea and land to make one proselyte, one follower, one disciple of yourself. And when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. Don't you dare take others down with you." I think back to the Sunday school teacher who taught little 8-year-old me in Sunday school. Man, he was a witness. Man, he wanted to see people saved. Until he got away from God. Until he got out of church. Until his boys, who were just a little younger than I, saw him quit on God. Who saw him walk away. And now these two young men are flamboyant homosexuals who openly reject God, who mock God, Jesus, the church. How do you stop a highly contagious disease? A disease like criticism. Well, you eliminate the conditions that keep it alive. Proverbs 26 verse 20 says, "Where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth." Let the gossip stop when it reaches your ears. Someone wants to give you something negative. Someone wants to talk to you. You say, "No! No! I want that fire to go out. It doesn't need any more wood." Another way, provide a strong dose of the remedy. Criticism is countered by praise. Well, does James say in chapter 3 that a fountain cannot produce bitter water and sweet. If you find yourself praising, you will not be complaining. In some cases, a highly contagious disease can only be removed by purging it out completely. Korah's bitter, critical, rebellious spirit required radical amputation. Listen, we should always pray for a brother's restoration. Not to say necessarily that Korah was a saved individual. But we're to pray for a brother's restoration. When he's gone wrong, we should do what we can to bring him back into the fold. But when he rejects that, you should do what Moses commanded and stand clear. Get away from his tent, because destruction is on the way. Proverbs 29:1 says, "He that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy." Well, not to close on a negative note, I'd like to tell you two more passages where Korah can be found. In Psalm 106, we read in verses 16 through 18, and by name, Dathan and Abiram are mentioned specifically as going into the earth opening up, swallowing them up. A fire was kindled in their company. The flame burned up the wicked. We don't see Korah's name here, but he was the lead character in number 16, so we know that this is definitely referencing him. Another place in Psalms where we see Korah's name, even though it does not appear technically within the inspired words of Scripture, we do see his name mentioned several more times. And it's mentioned in the signature of these psalms. Knowing that a psalm is a song, there are often directions or signatures given in the book of Psalms that either tell who wrote it, who it was written for, or under what circumstances it was to be sung. We read a Psalm of David, or a Psalm of Asaph, or a Song of Moses, to the chief musician. And in many cases it says, for the sons of Korah. meaning either it was intended for them to sing it or that one of them indeed did author the song. Psalms 42 through 50, Psalm 62, Psalm 72 through 85 are at least 11 of the Psalms that specifically are attributed to them, and maybe as many as 25 of the Psalms. Several beautiful and soothing passages are found within these Psalms of the sons of Korah, which go like this. As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so my soul panteth after thee, O God. We find, be still and know that I am God. We find, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. We find, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God and the mountain of His holiness. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth, is Mount Zion in the sides of the north, the city of our great King. Many of these songs have found their way into our songbooks in English as Christian songs. They have such depth of theology and comfort. These sons of Korah belong to the group called the Kohathites. That was a designation given to the descendants of Kohath, which we had mentioned already, is Korah's grandfather. These were men that were of the tribe of Levi, but that were not of the specific line of Aaron, so that they would serve in the priest's line. They had other duties, other jobs. One of the divisions of the Kohathites were the Korahites, or the Korahites. You guessed it. These would be descendants of Korah. Among their duties, they would be responsible for bearing the vessels of the tabernacle. You realize when the children of Israel moved from one place to another, they had to pack up the entire tabernacle and move to another location. Some of them would be responsible for carrying the vessels that were used. Some of them would be responsible for carrying the Ark of the Covenant on 2 staves, walking out. Others were custodians and doorkeepers for the tabernacle. Being that these songs were written for the sons of Korah, we understand that the children of Korah were spared in the destruction of number 16. Some have hypothesized that the children were too young and therefore not punished. Some have believed that the children these sons maybe were a part of the conspiracy. Yet, they repented. They backed out. Just like one of the 3 men that are mentioned in verse 1, a man by the name of On, is not mentioned in the destruction of the other 2. Jewish tradition tells us that he repented, that his wife somehow spared him. It's not ironic that one of the sons of Korah penned in Psalm 84, verse 10, "For a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness." These sons of Korah acknowledge that the position that their father detested and despised, when properly viewed, is a great honor from God. They realize that it was certainly better to be a simple doorkeeper or a vessel bearer or a singer, that it was much better to have a little role in the service of God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. And now you get the picture of the tents of wickedness, because the tents of wickedness were where Korah and Abiram and a Dathan dwelt. And they came to the doors of their tabernacles and their tents when Moses called them out, and they were sucked into the pit as the earth opened up. It's better to have a small role in God's kingdom than it is to be rebellious, seeking a large role and ending up in destruction. The final book in the Bible where we can see Korah is in 1 Chronicles. Of course, everybody's listed in Chronicles. It is a recap of all the genealogy, starting at Adam and working our way down. In chapter 6, we see his name mentioned. Just so that we know that we're dealing with the right Korah, we see him listed as a descendant of Kohath. We've got Kohath and then Korah on down the line, just so we know we're following the correct one. There are 4 different Korahs mentioned in the Bible. So this is, of course, the one who perished in number 16. In his descendants, we see a man named Elkanah. And following Elkanah, we see a man named Samuel. Samuel, you may remember, of course, if he is a descendant of Korah, a descendant of Kohath, not of the Aaronic line, but of Korah. He's meant to do nothing more than to be a doorkeeper, a vessel bearer, maybe a singer. But through the miraculous gift that God gave Elkanah and Hannah, who were unable to bear children, and she said, I am giving this child to you for as long as he lives. On the day that Eli, the high priest, and his 2 sons all perished, on the day that the Ark of the Covenant was taken away, Samuel became the high priest of the tribe of Levi, not of the lineage of Aaron. Not only was he the high priest, he became a prophet of God. Not only was he a priest and a prophet, he was the last in the line of Israel's judges. He was used by God in those ways, in many ways. Maybe more so than any other character in the Old Testament. He's highly underrated if you're naming your top 5 Old Testament heroes. He was used of God, not because of his pedigree, and not despite his pedigree, but because his heart was right before the Lord, and he was content to be a servant. Let me just tell you, a servant is not going to be covetous. A servant of God is not going to be critical. A servant of God is not going to be contagious in the negative sense. I challenge you today. Will you be a Korah? Or will you be a son of Korah? Will you be critical? Or will you be content? A servant has no ambition. Jesus Christ said, whosoever will be great among you, let him be your servant. Are you willing to be a servant today?